There are certain games that just can't seem to get away from their reputation. For Ghouls and Ghosts, everybody knows it as the game that is super easy. I'm just kidding. It's known for being a really hard game. So much so that some people won't even play it because the challenge is too frustrating. Fair enough, I've talked about how video games should be enjoyable in past videos. I think the biggest thing that makes this game difficult would have to be how random and sporadic the enemies and their patterns are. You can have a rough idea of how you want to try to maneuver through the stages, but you're likely going to have to make a lot of moment-to-moment reactions to get yourself out of some tight spots. However, most tutorials of all would have to be one of the dirtiest tricks in gaming in my opinion. And that trick would be to tell the player once they think they've beaten the game that they have to go back through the entire game again and do it all over. That has got to be the biggest insult ever. This little feature is pretty widely known in the retro gaming community by now, but I can only imagine how back in the day some of the first gamers to reach this point and figure it out for themselves must have felt. So now that we've got a lot of the negative out of the way, what makes this series loved by so many gamers? For starters, as is the case with a lot of difficult games, the difficulty can actually be considered a positive for those looking for a good challenge. I mean, it's very satisfying to be able to take down the boss at the end of each stage, or heck, even just make it to a stage's checkpoint. One thing I should point out about the Genesis version here is that it actually gives you an additional checkpoint over the arcade version, and it comes right before the boss fight, which is obviously really convenient since these bosses can be pretty tough. In fact, after getting used to playing the arcade version, I almost found it to feel like an unfair advantage, but I'm sure most people will be just fine making use of it. It's incredibly rewarding to beat a boss too, not only because it's an accomplishment in itself, but because it allows you to make it to the next stage. There's a lot of cool stuff to be appreciated in this game, once you've gotten good enough to be able to progress through it. The biggest part of it to me is just how well executed the overall theme of the game is, and the diversity from level to level. The game lives up to its title well with all sorts of ghouls and ghosts that you encounter along your way, with some especially creative designs among the bosses. In great contrast to all this spooky stuff, and adding a lot of character to the game, we have the main character, Arthur. Sure, he's a knight, but he's got red hair and a red beard, something I can relate to, and he's also got this super funny looking run. The way he does it, it looks like he's always just running for his life, and that makes sense because it's how you feel playing as him. The enemies in this game are constantly respawning, so you gotta keep moving and you cannot just sit around. However, I think the most notable feature related to Arthur has gotta be how when you get hit, you lose your armor and are left just running around in nothing but your boxers, and if you get hit one more time, you turn into a skeleton and die. This provides a really comedic nature to the game, because then you're just some dude in boxers running around all these creepy places, and it makes his frantic run look even more ridiculous. The other funny thing Arthur does is just the way he jumps. He basically does the splits in the air, and when you combine this with the time he's in just his boxers, you really feel like you're freeballing it. It's possible to get your armor back if you can find it in the stage, and you can even upgrade your basic armor to golden armor, which you're going to want because it gives whichever weapon you have an additional ability you can use. And speaking of weapons, a lot of the fun for this game comes from which weapons you can find and choose to use, as well as knowing how to use them. Also, I'd say avoiding certain weapons is a big part of the game as well. Because you have infinite respawns, players are known to intentionally die rather than picking up certain weapons. You see, you're stuck with whatever weapon you currently have when you die, which can be a blessing if it's a good weapon, or a huge bummer if it's a bad weapon. I really don't like the sword in this game. I mean, the other weapons can all be used as projectiles, but this one can't. Some bosses are almost impossible trying to use this stupid thing. Once you get the hang of this game, it's just a lot of fun to try to plow through. The Genesis version is a lot more forgiving than the original arcade version, and maybe it's just me, but it also feels like it plays a lot smoother. Part of that is the controls allow for diagonals, so Arthur doesn't come to a screeching halt when you accidentally hit a diagonal. This game was a really big showpiece for the Sega Genesis as well. It was an early release for the system and served as a good example of how experiences comparable to the arcade were possible. One of the best games for the system if you ask me, and it's one that I feel like I can always pop in. Anyways, that's what I think, but what do all of you think of this game? Does the challenge put you off, or do you love it like I do? As always, let us know down in the comments, and I will see ya in the next video.